morning, good afternoon, and good night, everyone. My name is Harry. And then the topics I wanted to bring up today is data science and compliance and fraud detections. And usually these are not the two topics that correlate, have a lot of correlations or, work together. But I wanted to use my experience in my career journey as a start, and then start to talk about why this is important, that companies nowadays should start to invest the data science elements and talents within compliance function and fraud detection functions. All right, so let's go over to the next slide. Oh, wait, is it working? I probably have to just mouse click. A little bit about me. So currently, I'm trying to do a lot of things. Is to bridge the compliance domain with data science elements. Means we apply more and more analysis and analytical elements to our traditional functions that's usually sitting within companies' finance or legal functions. My journey in my career path, it's starting from pure fraud investigators in a consulting company, EY, and then transition myself to become a data specialist in Johnson & Johnson. And then this year, I start to lead data science initiative in Spotify. When I was not working, I love speaking and writing about data science stuff at Medium and other knowledge platform. A little bit, so logistics and views. So views are mine. I'm not able to disclose confidential information, and we'll have to edit the story a little bit when it comes to confidential and compliance elements. And this is critical because today we're going to talk about a lot of things that we can use the data science and some of the machine learning skill set to kind of actually detect those fraud that we never ever think of. And here is the agenda, and I'm using the famous the golden circle logic, and start with the why I transfer from a pure fraud investigator, reading report, writing investigation report, testified on the court, to become a data scientist and leading those initiatives. And then after the why, I'm going to talk about how we build that connection between the two. So the data science and then the compliance functions, and how to speak the two language, because currently there is a disconnection between the two, and we are not able to effectively connect and communicate to each other. And then in the end, I'm going to bring up a little bit of the what to discover, like a couple data science opportunities in compliance. And those are not specific for just Spotify, but for more general applications around companies. And the tone that I set for this talk is not just for data scientists or data engineer. And I believe there might be a poll coming up really soon or already going on, and we can see like what's the audience combination of this talk. But to me, this talk is not just for data scientists, but for three types of folks. So I wanted to talk about and share my knowledge to the data scientists. I wanted to share my experience to the data scientists and encourage them to reach out to their compliance team and collaborate on any fraud detection or process mining projects, especially on those emerging risks. So encourage them to do something on the compliance domain. And on the other side, the second group of the audience, if you're working in the compliance domain already, like finance, legal, I recommend you to deploy the data science knowledge, basic knowledge, and know that how to use the data science to apply your day-to-day work, from investigation to prevention methodologies, and from qualitative investigations to quantitative investigations. And then in the end, the third type of the group, the management, I do wanted to use this talk to kind of encourage and bring up the topic about investing data science talent and resource within your compliance groups or functions to enhance the efficiency and the way we ever work on the compliance. So this is kind of a 2-minute takeaway for this. So too long, didn't read, but this is going to be the whole structure of the my talk. And I know sometimes people just don't finish their webinar or online speaking. So I'm just going to leave it here. And if you want, you can do a snapshot, whatever you want. All right. So we're gonna start with the why. So coming back to my journey, I start as an investigator. I been very actively working on global investigation in Asia Pacific and the Latin Americas. So at the time, a lot of time I do is I receive escalations, I read through the report, I do fraud investigation on the field, interviews, and then I write report and recommendations. And then at the time, what I realized is that while we are doing this investigations, we're doing this case by case. And then we're not able to really see the full picture about who else is doing these type of fraud, and how do we quantify the loss of fraud. And then when I was struggling on that, like how do I quantify those potential risks and loss within my investigation report, I start to see the data science is growing. And yeah, it's pretty obvious, and I believe you guys will be agreeing that data science is an emerging function in a very fast pace that most of the company within the industry, not just tech industry, but almost most of the industry are growing the data science functions. And we can see a lot of popular topics like personalizations, recommendation through your platform, or sometimes sales or marketing optimizations, and so many other stuff. And those are really popular, not just on the company. And you can even see those in any data science academic programs like Kaggle, LinkedIn Learnings, I don't know, Coursera. You can see those topics got searched millions of times. And Spotify is one of them. Like, we are very proud of our recommendation machine learning algorithms, and these are kind of our state-of-the-art products, so to speak, actually. So we are also a fan of it. But at the same time, back to the story, when I realized that data science is growing, but when I type those keywords like data science, space, fraud detections, data science, legal applications, okay, maybe there's some of the things that kind of disconnect between the two functions, and I listed here. So learning from the fraud investigation in a biotech and consulting experience that I have in the past. So first thing is that without the data science resource, it's pretty much difficult to ask like who else is doing this. Because right now we're basically just receiving escalation, we're receiving the allegation in a very piece-by-piece pictures, and if we don't build certain data science model or analytics platform, we don't really be able to see like, hey, who else is doing this? The second element is that the data, it's not usually collected to be the purpose for compliance or investigation purpose. So you can see a lot of data, and even Spotify, we collect a bunch of data that's, for example, users' activity, users' payment behavior, bunch of stuff. But there are not so many data elements that typically company collect just for compliance or fraud investigation purpose, or they are not configured that way. The third thing that I discovered that without data science is difficult is that we're not easy to deploy preventive approach versus the remediation approach. So currently, what I did in the past is remediation. I found a fraud, I discovered them, and I kind of put in disciplinary action plan for the company. But we don't have a way to really predict those emergent risks, sometimes in the middle of the matter happening, or sometimes before the matter is happening. Those kind of preventive approach is much, much cheaper than having a group of investigators investigating all the matters one by one. And now that we talk about the disconnection, I wanted to highlight and kind of give the numbers, because I know some of the audience in the groups are management. And the first question they will ask is like how big the issue is if we don't have a direct connection between our data science talents and the compliance functions. And here's a number that I have from the CFE Certificate Fraud Examiner Associations. So typically, and I think that number has been very stable for the past 3 to 5 years, that the organizations typically lost 5% of their revenue each year just because of the fraud. And there are more elements because there are more elements to add on this estimations, because to this year we are having COVID-19 and the way we work is changed significantly. And based on the news and research, I'm able to kind of suggest that the risk of the fraud is increasing, both on the type of the risk and then the impact of the risk. And then the work from home scenario also boosts the likelihood of the fraud activities, because nowadays we don't have those pantry site discussions. We're having less transparency within our office and general work environments. So those are the things to consider after we see this 5% numbers. And then with that, I'm going to, and by the way, there is the QR code if you wanted to see the full report from the ACFE about the fraud quantifications. So I probably already speak about like 100 times of fraud, but then like what type of fraud we're typically focusing in my career, or to our audience, a little bit basic background about like what type of fraud we're focusing today. So I'm looking for 2 types of the fraud. First one is more financial driven. So let's say asset misappropriations. Typically, let's say travel expense, payment fraud to third party, shell company. And then the second one, corruptions, and some of them also called a conflict of interest. So typically you can find those on, again, third party, sometimes our vendors or our distributors of the company products. And then the third type is on the financial statement fraud, which is more rare domestically, but it's kind of like revenue manipulations, these kind of stuff. The second part is actually I wanted to highlight today because outside of the traditional financial compliance, we also have more and more regulatory compliance that coming up to the plate that all the companies do focus, but there are just so many, and I put some of the highlights here. So for example, GDPR for data privacy, CCPA, specifically for the US and California. COPPA is data privacy law specific for children. And there are other regulatories happening across the globe, like PSD2. If you're having an online payment platform as as part of your product, that's something you also have to consider. So yeah, now that we know the type of the fraud, we wanted to go over some of the Spotify compliance journey and our functions currently sitting within Spotify. So we currently have those functions here, and I belong to internal audit, but we also have compliance engineering, financial engineering, privacy security, and payment fraud, and more. The reason I list those functions here is kind of bring up the topic that a lot of companies nowadays are investing data science resource and talents with the company, but not very diverse to each functions. For example, those functions I list in my presentations are typically a blend of the data science, but not so much like full-blown technical or R&D groups. So I wanted to list this presentation to kind of get the heads up about like, hey, if you're wanting to invest more data science resource, where is the location and where's the function you should look at. All right, so that's basically all of the why we wanted to invest data science in the compliance. So we talk about type of the risk, we talk about my career journey and those typical fraud types, and we also talk about how to the quantification of the fraud, the 5% magic numbers. Now I want to switch to how do we connect the two and explore the typical disconnections between the two functions. And at this point, I wanted to introduce you guys my avatar, I call it Uri. So Uri is one of the avatar I use to discover problems and look for solutions. And in this story, he is looking for some solution to enhance the compliance environment by using data science. Let's say deploy predictive model and replace current rule-based financial controls. It's a really ideal, good plan, ideal scenario solutions. But typically, what Uri would discover typically is that a couple of feedbacks. So first of all, we don't have the data for those. We just don't collect them. We're pretty much used to and happy with current manual review process. And the third one, and which is my favorite, I'm not sure if I can trust the machine learning model to detect the outliers, versus me manually looking at those. The fourth one, it's not efficient to teach our legals and auditors to code. And again, I'm not against any of those feedbacks and opinion. They're all legit, but that typically represent the current picture about why it is difficult to deploy data science resource within those compliance functions. So yeah, it is okay, Uri. So collecting feedback, he decides it's probably okay to continue the current practice. Means that compliance function, we do our control review manually without analytics and outsource some of the review and investigation with Big Four accountings and law firms. And don't get me wrong, I'm a huge friend of our Big Four accounting friends and law firms colleagues, but there are usually the way we currently do. They're usually the current solution in the compliance where we are having a large scale of issues or review we want to conduct, but we don't have the resource or solutions for data science to deploy data science solutions. All right, so I think after those conversation or feedback that I listed here, I guess we have a certain pictures in our mind about, these are typical, I won't say feedback, but opinions or comments that we have. So where is the disconnections? To me, I would say the disconnection that we will have those feedbacks is because the data science community within your company and the compliance community is not speaking the same language. The language barrier in collaborations. So I have another avatar here. She's a data scientist within our companies, and she just realized she had some good idea and she wanted to discover more. So yeah, listen here. For a clustering machine learning models, we use UMAP to dimensional reduction for dimensional reflections, and we wanted to try HDB scan for clustering. We wanted to cluster our premium subscription users and use the SHAP value to evaluate the impact for each input features. # user segmentation, which is a really good idea for a very researching project about clustering the users. Seems legit. We don't want to cluster all the users. We use UMAP plus HDB scan. Sounds pretty legit. The only problem that I have is that it's not the language our compliance and financial function will speak. So here's the problem statement I listed here that probably will commonly discover through our conversation within the compliance. So we suspect to have a volume of underage users within our 12+ platform, and potentially bypassing the age gate and might be exposed to explicit content. And by the way, those are just hypothetical theory. These are the language that typically would discover within compliance legal functions and not so much technical. So now you know the disconnection, right? Within those two dialogue, we don't find it possible or easy to have them find each other. Doesn't matter you're using Slack channel or your company has a very transparent communications like newsletter, I don't know, workplace or blog. It's just not there because there's a disconnection between the two language that we don't know that the compliance function can reach out for the help from the data science team and use potentially the clustering model to solve that problem. At the same time, the data science community doesn't really know that problem. It's a good use case for clustering. So That's kind of tweak the language a little bit. That's kind of tweak a little bit. So assuming we also have a kids app and have a profile level features that we can collect the user activity features for the kids. Means that now that instead of just having activity data for adult users, we also have activity data for kids users. So now that trying to brainstorming, you probably start to realize, hey, it might be a good use case for binary prediction, which is not a clustering. But can you imagine? We can also do it with clustering? And the reason is the answer is yes. If we mix them both, we can actually to find that if we can have a pretty or beautiful clustering that we see it's a kid, we actually can identify those adult users, but still sitting within the kid clusters. And I think that's the beauty of connecting the two use case, connecting the use case from our compliance team, and then the solutions from our data science community. So I list the conversation here. If we change language, so let's look at this. If our data scientists were to ask, hey, if we put our kids user with regular users and see if they can try out a clustering to classify the kids user well, and maybe we can use actually Boost to find out, to start to use it as a predictor to predict any kids users sitting in our adult platform, right? And by doing that, we might find a way to identify a good mix of the features to binary predict if the regular is underage. And once we have that actually Boost model deployed and our prediction is trained, the accuracy rate is within our confidence level, we can actually deploy this into production and start to do actions. Means that Spotify users, if we predict you as an underage, but then you bypass the gate, maybe we can have another survey for you. Maybe we can have another engineering solutions deployed based on that for that compliance issues. So that's the real connection. Now that we change a little bit, we talk, the solution is kind of surfacing. And yeah, in this picture, I'm not able to disclose too much, but the clustering of our users or to detect underage, potentially underage user is definitely feasible, or at least worth a try if we connect the two functions. Sounds good. All right. And that's pretty much about how do we connect the two. So after that, I want to speak a little bit about what can we discover if we connect the two, the data science community and the compliance community. So yeah, the DS opportunity in compliance and fraud detections. One caveat here, the opportunity that I list is not everything I can think of. So definitely there are much more sitting out there that I don't have. I'm not able to put it into my presentation, but the key is to give some of the brainstorming elements for us. If you are a data scientist, these might be a good starting point for you to deploy or collaborate within the compliance functions. In this page, I'm listing 4 kind of important compliance initiative that might worth a try if you want to collaborate with them. And if you look at those, I put a little smile face or question face, means that how well or how modernized currently those processes are being are having data science elements. So let's look at the first one, the payment or streaming fraud, which I put a smiley face there, is because these are the ones who enjoy a good mix of the data science resource. In their help, we can have a bunch of machine learning models to detect payment fraud, streaming fraud, or if we are talking about like subscriptions reselling fraud, like Spotify, we have family account and sub account. How do we detect those sub account being reselling in some of the emerging market? But yeah, these are the one typically got blessed with a bunch of data science elements, because first we got good quality of the data. Second, those machine learning model can be very helpful when we have a good amount of the streaming fraud, because we are not almost unlikely to investigate them one by one. The second is the content classification and moderations. And those are typically the one that we wanted to start to look at, let's say, NLP, natural language processing, about, let's say, lyrics, or the contents that we have from our Spotify podcast. So these are the good opportunities if your companies are doing something similar, means that your companies that process content, doesn't matter it's music or video or any type of content, those moderations might be a good starting point if you wanted to involve in some of compliance projects. The third one is SOX compliance / financial audit. And I know, if most of our audience are sitting in the data science and data engineering domain, this SOX compliance might be a little bit unfamiliar with you, but it's Sarbanes-Oxley compliance. It's a very accounting-heavy term. Means that we, as a public listing company, we all have a bunch of different financial control that to make sure our company numbers are accurate and complete. But a bunch of the control, or many, I don't want to use the many, but some of the control as of today are still being very manually reviewed and processed. And I do believe there are a lot of opportunity to deploy data science model or machine learning model to predict any outliers on those review, instead of a monthly just sign off manual checklist kind of thing. The last one, which is a focus, and I actually use that as example, right? Data privacy. For example, having children's data sitting in our platform, underage users enjoying our service, but then we wanted to identify those. So currently, most of the company, probably including us, are reviewing the encryption of the user data and have some of data usage analytics. But because the data privacy review are leaning very towards the legal side of it, I don't see too much of the application about deploying the data science application of it. So definitely wanted to encourage you guys to try those top 4. And yeah, and there are so many more that I'm not able to list in here because of the nature of the data science. We are trained to discover insights where we have better control over data, which is fair. But the use case that I listed here, it's definitely a good use case, even though the data or data quality might not be there as of today. All right, so these are the typical use case I want to share. So next one. We're closing to the end of the presentation, but some of the heads up or so-called suggestion when you, as a data scientist, trying to collaborate with compliance functions. So first of all, and I really like this one. Remember I talked about data nowadays are typically not collect in the purpose of the compliance purpose, but more of like sales-driven, marketing-driven, or other major domain. So efficiency, accuracy, completeness of the data collection can be a finding if you found out that we wanted to do a compliance project, which is important, but we just don't have the data to cook. And that self can be a finding and become a compliance issue that our engineering and solution team should be working on. And I want to encourage that because a lot of data scientists will be like, hey, I want to join those initiatives, but we just don't have the data. And that self, it can become a finding itself. So don't worry too much on that first point. The second, not everything needs to be in ML. So we still, in a very, in the spirit of transparency, that we in compliance and functions and finance functions are still very into rule-based analytics, and those can always be the good start when we start the initiative. So the rule-based analytics historic versus ML, I would say go for the rule-based as the first. And sometimes if we've been through, after been through all the deployment of the machine learning research, sometimes we actually do reverse engineering of our ML result and then simplify it and make it back to rule-based analytics just to make it easier to understand, more friendly with our compliance finance functions. The last one, it's about the prevention over remediations. So I think this is a very basic machine learning idea about like, precision versus accuracies, where you are deploying a machine learning model that's, say, binary predictions. In the marketing, sales, recommendation, optimization sides, those top domains, these topics are really important for us to make sure we have our models to kind of optimize to have both accuracy and precision. But within the compliance or financial sides, it's a good trade-off for us if we wanted to know, are we tolerable for missing one true negative? And the reason I'm saying that is because, let's say if you're doing a machine learning model just to detect the outliers, but then if you're having a very strict rule sets that almost predict everyone as a non-compliance items, we just don't have the resource to investigate all of them, because our resource naturally is having those limitations. So the trade-off on that, first of all, is, are we tolerable for missing one true negative? On the same side, versus if we have a very loose machine learning model that almost don't detect any non-compliance entity or any non-compliant incidents, are we able to endure and still remediate the cost of missing that non-compliance entity or non-compliance incident? So again, the accuracy and precision, it's almost like an art when you want to do compliance data science initiative. And always think about those two questions when you're deploying those and discuss with your compliance functions. It's going to be really helpful if you already know the direction from compliance function and say, hey, let's only look at the accuracy versus precision, because our resource is just like that. So we definitely want to do that. So forget about optimization, but let's look at the customized accuracy and precision rate we want specifically for this compliance project. All right, so we kind of go over the what type of initiative we can use on data science initiative. I wanted to bring back this slide and kind of answer those questions of feedback that I left in the past. So right now, after we talk about the why, how, and what, if we think about the first question, we don't have the data for those. We just don't collect them. Don't forget about that. The data collection, not in this, if we don't have a good quality or quantity of the data that we can collect just for the compliance initiative, that self can just become finding and have engineer working on it to make sure we have better security over compliance. So not having data, it's not an issue, but what we need is to identify those lack of data. Second, we're used to and happy with current manual review process, and this is a very fair question. But again, deploying data science resource and elements to those compliant functions, it's really key to kind of improve and make the whole process more effective by detecting those outliers more precisely and potentially discover more, in terms of the quantifications, more outliers versus manual review process. So yeah, we could be happy and used to manual process, but the numbers and the result of the machine learning model or the data science elements will prove that why we want to move from manual review to more analytical process. Third, I'm not sure if I can trust the machine learning to detect outliers. And that kind of ties back our conversation about accuracy and precision. So the answer is yes. No one should trust any machine learning model, even it's a production form, because there's always a trade-off between accuracy and precision. But what we do is to tailor it to make sure we're having the best precision and accuracy rates that fits exactly to our resource. Means that if we are able to tolerate more of the true negative, then we will have a loosened machine learning model for detecting outliers, and vice versa. But yeah, that's a legit question, and it's all about trade-off. Last one, it's not efficient to teach our legals and auditors to code, and that's another fair question. So nowadays, we also have a bunch of platforms like Dataiku or other platforms sitting in the market. But I would say the best way is to actually have our data science group working and collaborating directly with our compliance group instead of just teaching or just do knowledge sharing or communication, but literally invest time to work on compliance project and demonstrate the results. So that's pretty much my answers to those typical questions you probably get when you wanted to start working on some of the compliance projects using data science. So in the end of the presentation, again, too long, didn't read, but I add a little bit of flavor to change my summary of this talk. So now that we know that for data science, I definitely encourage to reach out, but with suggested language. So when I mean suggest language, remember the conversation that I have between the data scientists and the compliance functions. It's not just selling your technical language, but also bring up the usage or connect the usage to your connect the use case to your technology applications. So I think that's the missing language, and we wanted to use those suggested language when you do the communications. For compliance, I would definitely recommend to equip data science language knowledge and machine learning knowledge. And when I mean knowledge, it's not teaching you to code, but I believe those one-on-one knowledge, basic background story can make it very helpful when we want to connect compliance and data science. And that's the edits for this takeaway. And I think I'm pretty much ready for questions. I see. Should I just open one of the tab here? Let me see.
Sure, Alec, if you want to handle the Q&A portion.
Sure. So actually, we only have one question so far, so I definitely encourage the audience to add more questions if they have them. So it's up to you, Harry, how you want to address this. Given you had a transition into data science and you didn't start off trained exactly for that, what sort of resources would you recommend to someone that is looking to make a transition or get started? It's almost like there's too much out there if you start searching for what's available. Like what was most helpful for you?
So in terms of the resource, I started my transition on the job, right? So one thing that I do is definitely most of these resources you can find online. So not to mention those popular ones, that's say Kaggle, Coursera, LinkedIn Learnings, but I also start with some of the projects on the job when I was in the company. So still having the investigator title sitting in my company, but I was trying, at the time, I tried to do more on analytics. For example, I start with something like visualization on Tableau, data analytics softwares, and then start to get into my interest into more pure data science elements like machine learnings or data science projects that coming from the job. So I think it's like both sides. I do a lot of online resource and materials, but at the same time, I'm pushing myself to all kinds of company, all kinds of the project that's sitting in the company. I hope that answered.
Yeah, I think that's great advice. You don't want to try to go into a completely new domain and now also do data science. Kind of start with your company if possible, or a domain you're familiar with. So at least you have some background on how to approach it.
Mm-hmm.
It looks like that's it for the questions. So I wanted to thank you very much, Harry, and appreciate you joining us for this event. And I'll let you close out, Chloe, with any reminders or announcements.
Yep. Thank you so much, Harry. I just wanted to ask if you have any final thoughts or anything you wanted to elaborate on. Otherwise, we can definitely close out.
No, I'm happy to chat. If you have any question, you can definitely find me on LinkedIn or reach out to me, and happy to discuss.
Looks like we do have one more question.
Oh, cool. Yeah, sure.
So one person wrote in, can you elaborate a little more on other projects you have worked on at Spotify? And I know that you want to approach this from a higher level.
Yeah, so obviously I'm not able to allowed to give too much detail about the compliance data science initiative I'm working on, but couple high-level elements. So Spotify is very focused on our data privacy. And for example, we want to make sure our encryptions are sitting tight as we promote it on public informations. So these are the things that we typically review the policy. So we can have a bunch of lawyers or auditors reviewing the policies, but who is going to do really browsing through the data or activity log to see who had access to certain data sets? Are those data encryption really tight as what we thought? So these are the data science elements we didn't typically look at. And that's pretty much the information I'm able to give about data privacy. But if you're interested about more, I think there are a bunch of other data science initiatives that I list in one of the presentations, including payment fraud, financial compliance, and content moderations and classification. I think those are the projects that I would say it's a very good start for data scientists, but working on the compliance domain.
Awesome.
Hope that helped.
So
great. And we did have one more late-breaking question, kind of again on the relationship between the data scientists and compliance. It was kind of a two-parter. What's the most valuable input from the compliance expert's perspective, and how can the compliance expert help the data scientists build the database together? Like how can they effectively work together?
Gotcha. So one thing that I would say the most valuable thing is that the compliance teams are asking the good questions that data scientists will pick it up right away and say, hey, this is a data science question, and I'm happy to help on exploring the data with you. So if we go back to one of the slides that I have, a compliance team might raise a question about, hey, potentially we got a tip about we have underage use case, users sitting on platforms bypassing the age gate. That wording itself is probably not super helpful for data scientists to pick it up. But if we transfer and background with a little bit machine learning and data science background, we can transfer that into and say, hey, we already have a data set that collect the kids' user activity. We already have that profile level features and user activity features. I think at that point, data scientists will be very easy to chime in and start to say, hey, I think there might be three, four ways of doing this by or predict your potential underage users within our platform. But that connection is the missing part. I would say very valuable for a compliance function to bring up by asking the right questions. I hope that helped.
Great, thank you.